right back to you.
Good back. I've got your back.
So, all right, I'll do it like this. Perfect. All righty, y'all. Are we ready? Are we good?
Yes.
So here's what I'm thinking. You tell me if you see it going a different way, and I'm happy to change it up. But I was going to speak for a few minutes, talk a bit about my upbringing, why I'm doing what I'm doing, what I want to accomplish, why I think we can win this thing, which I hope you all agree is the most important thing in 2018. And then we can open it up and do what John Faso doesn't do, which is take actual questions without screening them before doing so. Does that work? Does that make sense to everybody? Okay, great. So, Antonio Delgado, Democrat for candidate for Congress, New York 19. And this matters a lot to me. I think we all understand now that we are living in a moment of real crisis, moral crisis, not just political, where our values, our ethics, everything that we train our young kids up on. I have twin boys, 4 years old. The things that I teach them day in and day out right now are being under assault by what we call leaders. And chief among them is Trump. But Faso is no better. Now, I live in Rhinebeck with my wife and our 2 little boys, but my story begins in Schenectady, a working class town. My parents worked for GE for a very long time. And back then, in the mid-'70s up to the mid-'90s, GE and IBM had a major presence all throughout the Hudson Valley and the Catskills and provided real, predictable, secure income for folks that allow parents like mine to plan for their children's future, put money away, and work their way up from working class to middle class. And we actually lived that life. Our apartments were very small. The neighborhoods weren't that great early on, but over time, the neighborhoods got better. The apartments got better. And the house that we bought my freshman year in high school was our first home. And it was a magical moment. My dad actually walked me out on the property and said, "This is what hard work gets you in this country." Now, I was a latchkey kid. So at 10 years old, my brother was 8. I was coming home every single day, doing my homework, leaving it on the counter, and my parents would come home like clockwork every day and bring out that red pen and figure out whether or not I did it right, I did it well enough. Now, as a father of twin boys now, I know how much that mattered and how much time and effort it took for them. They believe, as they should, that education is the great equalizer, the gateway to opportunity in this country, no matter where you start, your race, your class, your religion, your gender. If you get a good education, you should be able to work your way up and be successful and live a better quality of life than those who came before you. That is the story of this country. I'd argue we've gone very, very far away from that reality for a lot of folks, particularly here in the Hudson Valley and the Catskills. Now, I benefited. My wife, who's 41, who's from Woodstock, also benefited because we're that last generation of young folks who grew up under that old economic model before the world got big and globalization happened and the GEs went overseas and the IBMs left and technology got so good that you can invest in wealth and capital, not invest in people anymore. But we were that last generation that benefited. She's now a successful documentary filmmaker with the Georgetown, and we've been to law school at Harvard. I ended up going to Colgate. Played basketball there, studied philosophy and political theory, and learned a very important lesson about this country. We were founded on principles and values, not on geography, not on language. We're not tribal at our core, we are aspirational. And we've been fighting for equality and expanding freedom ever since this country's inception. I'd argue until now. We have now decided to turn the entire car all the way around. And we are rolling back all the gains that folks sacrificed their lives for, both here on our soil and abroad. Now, I ended up earning a Rhodes Scholarship when I was at Colgate. And I can tell you, when I was cutting coupons with my mother on Saturday mornings, we weren't talking about me going to Oxford as a Rhodes Scholar. But there I was. I came back, got my law degree, met my wife there. I've had 2 careers since law school. My first 5 years, I moved to LA, started my own independent music company, working with young kids from underserved communities, trying to inspire them to get more civically engaged through hip-hop culture. Now, my parents were definitely a little bit confused by my decision with my law degree from Harvard. But they also knew that it was a reflection of how I was raised, and that was to serve and to give back to my community. I did that for 5 years, then moved back to the East Coast, and I've been practicing as a litigator in the commercial space for the last 6 years. So very diverse set of experiences. I've been blessed, been very fortunate, But a very different story has been happening right here at home for that same period of time. The jobs that were here are gone. The focus on education is not what it used to be. We had 3 presidential debates. Not a single question was asked about education. Not a single question was asked on the national stage. The economy has doubled in size over the last 40 some odd years. What has happened to wages? Where have they gone? Nowhere. The cost of education has gone up. Housing has gone up. Healthcare has gone up. Everything has gone up except for wages. Everything. 80% of folks right now are being asked to share, are being asked to share 10% of the wealth. 80% share 10% of the wealth. Last year alone, the top 10% captured more than 75% of all the income in this country. All of it. 2/3 of folks are living paycheck to paycheck right now in the richest, wealthiest country in the world's history. And what do we get as solutions for all of this? Our solutions are to say, let's take healthcare away from those who need it the most for a tax break to a wealthy few. That's the solution we get. We have a congressman right now who voted to do just that. We are the only developed country in the world without universal healthcare. The only one. How about we actually fight for that instead? And make sure that folks actually have affordable, accessible care. And we fight and make sure that Medicare can negotiate drug prices with the pharmaceutical industry, which is a travesty. They can do that. They can't do that. A travesty. It's a crime in and of itself. Then we get the tax bill. The tax bill comes along. Adds $1 trillion to our deficit on the backs of working and middle class families just to do a tax break for big corporations and a wealthy few on a failed theory of trickle-down economics. Anything with the word trickle in it cannot be deemed just. Okay? Opportunity should not just trickle down. You build it. It must bubble up. You must invest in communities again. I say repeal that tax bill, close corporate loopholes, make sure that corporations pay their fair share, and invest that prosperity in our infrastructure. Roads, rail, broadband access, cell service. Get folks working again and incentivize economic opportunity from the ground up. That's what it takes. And oh yeah, let's get back to education. Universal pre-K, early childhood care. These are the things that we have to be doing. And then within K through 12, rethinking our entire curriculum. Science, technology, engineering, math are critical, but we've got to get back to teaching our children holistically. Arts, dance, music, civics. Make sure and provide hard skills. Hard skills. Apprenticeship programs, trade schools, vocational schools. We've abandoned all of this and have left our young people essentially to fend for themselves with mounting debt. And that's the other thing.
And piles of pills.
And piles of pills. You're right.
It's the American way.
You're right. It's not the American way, and it shouldn't be the American way. And people are tired of it. And then we wonder why they stop believing in democracy. And we have trends towards autocrats and authoritarian figures who essentially wipe their behinds with our Constitution. This does not happen overnight. This comes from neglect and abandonment. And communities have been left behind, whether it's in the Rust Belt or right here at home in upstate New York. And nothing's come up from behind to figure out how we create real opportunity and growth and a vision for a way forward, because all we got are folks in Congress who care about their power and a little pin on their lapel. And that's it. And whoever pays for them to stay in Congress. That's it. We got to change that. And that's what I'm here to do. And I think because I come from the margins, because I understand the value of a good education, a good public school education, I understand the value of a good, reliable job that pays meaningful wages. And I saw my parents benefit from that and how I was able to benefit from that. This matters deeply to me. It is personal. And I can't see all this just come undone. At my children's expense, your children's expense, our country's expense. So we have got to fight now and stand up. But we are right on the front lines. Right here in the Hudson Valley Cast, we're on the front lines of a national movement to restore who we are as a country. To restore our values. Restore the American dream. Restore this sense that no matter who you are, you can make a way in this world, in this country. That's what I'm here to fight for. And if we do that in this moment, we do that now, we make a statement to ourselves and to the world at large. And I'll conclude with this, and we can take some questions. When the New Deal was going on, I'm doing some reading about the New Deal. There was a man who was writing about it, who said the country had not been in a more intense and sweeping conversation up until that point. Well, that made me think about now. Because I don't think, at least in my lifetime, our country has been in as much as an intense and sweeping conversation about who we are. Who we are. Are we going to be that country that opens up our arms to the world and is a beacon of hope and a pillar of democracy? Or are we going to close our fists and revert back to might is right? That is the tension. And who gets left out in that world? The ones without. The ones who are hurting already. They just get pushed into the cracks. Pushed. Now, no one wants a handout. I'm not up here asking for a handout. But when you stop giving hands up, when you stop providing opportunities, when you start forcing folks to the edges and to the margins, that's called oppression. It's not a just society. And as long as we keep fighting in this direction or going in this direction, we have a real problem on our hands. The good news for us is we can fix it right here at home by, in the first instance, getting rid of John Faso. Because we know what side he's on.
He's against the deer ticks.
It's clear. Yeah, so he says. So he says. You know, you have to have some funding to do the research to figure out how to find cures for that kind of stuff. He ain't doing that. No funding for that kind of stuff. So,
You have to believe in science.
you know, got to believe in science and not just, you know, give lip service. So, happy to take questions, but I'm happy to talk about in more detail how we can win this thing, because we can win it. But I want to keep talking. I want to make sure you guys can ask questions, and we can just mix it up. And I'm happy to engage you guys.
Why you and not the other 6?
Great. That's what I want to hear. So
7 or 8, right?
there's 7. No, he's got it right. He's got it right. There's 7 total.
Some dropped out.
Here's the reason why. First of all, the way you measure, I would argue, who's best to win or best to serve, who you should vote for, is who can beat John Faso. We're all more or less aligned,
No argument.
right, in our issues. Good. So who can,
The primary is June
26,
26th.
4 weeks away as of yesterday.
Right.
Whoever can beat John Faso has got to do a few things. I'd argue. Number one, the candidate has to be able to work their butt off. They have to go everywhere, be seen, be heard, all throughout this county. They've got to do the work, and not just parachute in and not just come here and there, but be everywhere. I've been everywhere from the start. Over a year, I've been on the ground, traveling all across this district, doing the work. It helps that I am a guy who comes from a working class family, and I am a kid or a guy who was told when he was a kid to work twice as hard to make sure you succeed. And that's the same thing that I've been doing all throughout this process. And it's the reason why, among all the candidates in this race, I've done a few things better. I've raised more money than everybody in the field. And not a single dollar has come from a corporate PAC. Not one. All of it has come from individuals. Me and my wife making calls, reaching out to our friends, our family, day in and day out, putting the hours in and doing the work. We've raised more than $2 million. More than $2 million. That is more than any candidate in this race, including John Faso himself. I'm the only candidate in this race that outraised John Faso all 4 quarters in 2017. Thank you. Now, if you want to beat John Faso, who was backed by the Mercer family, they gave $500,000 to him, and they gave $10 million to Breitbart in way back when. We know where his money is coming from. You got to have a candidate who can raise money, but it's not just about the money. Because I want money out of politics. If it's up to me, I get it all out of politics. All of it. So it's really about also the organization. And I can out-organize it. Because I've been out-organizing my campaign colleagues. I'm the candidate, the only candidate with a county-wide endorsement from Dutchess County. When it came to petitioning, you needed 1,250 to get on the ballot. I got almost 6,000, more than 1,000 than any other candidate in this race. I just secured the endorsement of Citizen Action, a critical progressive grassroots organization that is New York-based. Again, speaks to my ability to build coalitions and build an organization. Now, we've taken that organization, I've set up shop in a movement all across this district. I was also the first candidate to attack John Faso on TV. First to run ads, first in mailboxes. We have continued to be out front pacing. Here's the last piece. And I mean it, in my opinion, it's the most important one. Turning out the vote. Who can turn out the vote? 161 or 2,000 folks voted for John Faso in 2016. 162,000. Remember that number. Voted for John Faso. 141,000 or so voted for Teachout. About 27,000 window gap. Do you know how many folks were registered to vote in this district in 2016 that did not vote? 178,000 were registered and did not vote. 100,000 were eligible for enrollment. So we need a candidate who has the resources, the work ethic, the organization, and I would argue the ability to inspire, to be bold, and to get people's imagination working again, and excited again, and believing again that this system can work for them. And that's what I think I can do better than anybody else in this field. You combine all those things together, and you have a decisive victory. Not a nail biter. We beat him decisively.
Are you going to debate Faso?
I love to. Now I'm gonna answer both. I'm gonna put both these together. The other thing that you want in a candidate who can beat John Faso is someone who can out debate him. He's good. I'm not gonna lie to you about that. I'm an objective person here. I watched him against T-Chow. He's seasoned. He's been trained to do this his whole life. He's slippery. Now, it just so happens I've spent 7-8 years of my professional career as a litigator in the corporate environment dealing with some sharks. Cross-examinations, depositions, judge, jury. This is what I do. This is my skill set. Trained at a very high level to do this. So I look forward, I salivate at the thought of being one-on-one with him, with real facts in hand. Because to be fair to T-Chow, at that point he didn't have a record yet. He had one in the assembly, but not as a congressman. Now he's got a record. That farm bill, that's his record. Right? That vote on the ACA, that's his record. To vote to defund Planned Parenthood, that's his record. Right? The way he quietly said no around the tax bill and only focused on the SALT deduction, not the 15% corporate tax break giveaway to big corporations. That's on his record. These are the things that I will pin him down on. Pin him down on. And I think he'll have a problem to deal with that. Real problem. Yes?
I just wondered, how long have you been a Democrat?
My whole life.
Really?
Yes.
Been a registered Democrat?
So my parents raised me, I come from a family of
Because one
Democrats.
of the other candidates said he was the only one that had been a registered Democrat his whole life.
So
No, that was Brian Flynn said that.
Yeah, is that true?
So here's let me tell you, here's my life. Okay? My parents raised me very much entrenched in the history of the civil rights movement. And they talked a lot about that and what it did for them and what it meant to me. And they talked a lot about how Democrats were at the forefront of that. And so when I was growing up, I always associated the work of equality, the work of opportunity, the work of justice, squarely within the Democratic Party. And I've been a registered Democrat since the day I could register. Now, in 2014, I did get upset at the trends in our political system, particularly the fact that I started to struggle with this idea that both parties seem to be drifting a little bit away from the people, too far away from the people, too far away from working class folks. And I wanted to make a point to myself at least and say, you know what, I don't agree with this movement. I don't agree with where the system as a whole, the whole apparatus, where it's moving to. And I was upset at the reality of this sort of duopolistic system that is frustrating for folks who want to just make change and make a difference in working folks' lives. So I decided, you know what, I want flexibility. I don't want to align myself right now. Now fast forward a couple years later, and Trump gets elected. And that was a moment where I had to say to myself, okay, either you continue to sort of make a statement to yourself, or you fight to bring back the values that you know are still within the party that we have to amplify and stand up and work towards day in and day out. I had that discussion with myself and said, you know what, I'm prepared to do that work. Because I know what I stand for. I know that the values that I am raised on are of this party. And if we all just don't own them like we ought to, then what happens? Well, we end up with a vacuum. And not only a vacuum, but a vacuum that enables folks who are morally bankrupt to inhabit a space that is meant to do right by people. And so with that, I came back and said I'm gonna continue to be a Democrat.
Okay.
So technically speaking,
Okay, I got that. Now, one more little thing on that is, did you vote for a Democrat in the last election?
well, I couldn't. That was also the frustrating piece. In the primary, I couldn't.
Okay.
In the general, obviously, I did. I shouldn't say
Okay, that's
obviously.
all I wanted.
I shouldn't say obviously. In the general, you better believe
You know,
I
there's
did.
Green Party and all these other things.
No. I'm a Democrat.
Okay.
Make no mistake about it. I'm a Democrat. I'm a progressive. Okay? I'm a progressive. And if anything, my decisions to unaffiliate have more to do with me being a progressive than anything else. And the fact that I was looking for that and wasn't seeing enough of it. Yes.
Antonio, so I've been doing a little research about unions in
Mhm.
this part of the world. I don't know what's going on in the rest of the country, but it's beginning to see that a lot of union people are starting to vote for Republicans. And so my question to you is, when you get the nomination and you go out there and fight Faso, how are you going to deal with issues like, why would union people vote for Republicans?
Well, let me that's a great question, and
I
it
can't
speaks
even
to
think why.
it speaks to the question just raised, right?
Yeah.
What happened? How did Republicans seize the narrative that they are the ones who are about working folk, about labor, about unions? How did that happen? How is that possible unless somewhere along the way our party lost its sight and enabled someone to sort of encroach into what should be our domain and what we talk about. Along the way, you have, don't be mistaken here, a concerted effort from moneyed interests who desperately want to destroy unions, who have pumped money and millions of dollars into a campaign to do just that. So while there might be more and more Republicans per se who support unions, there are just fewer and fewer and fewer unions and folks who work in unions because of these right-to-work laws. And you have this Janus decision that's up right now from the Supreme Court, where literally the Supreme Court is deciding whether or not it is legal for a non-union member to still get the benefit of union protection without having to pay any fees. Just happen to be at the place of employment, and because you're there, you get the same support that you would get even if you paid money into it. The fees that are used, by the way, to help do the work of protecting workers. How is that fair? But right now, the highest court in the land is deciding that case. And it's unclear how that court is even going to land. We could literally walk out of the Supreme Court with the law of the land being, you do not have to be a union member and you still get the benefit of union protection without having to pay a cent into the union. That could be the law of the land. So when you talk about what's happening in unions, they've been decimated. So it's not just the fact that Democrats have lost a bit of their vision, there's also been a coordinated attack on unions from moneyed interests. So much so that 40 plus years ago, 7 out of 10 folks were in a union. That was 3 out of 10. 3 out of 10. So how do I fight that? Well, we can restore the Labor Act and make sure that it has extended protections and extended penalties. We can do things like the Work Democracy Act, which is what Bernie Sanders has proposed, which allows folks to join unions a little bit easier. These are things that we could do to shore up unions and actually roll back these right-to-work laws and get back to prioritizing protecting labor once again and break up all these monopolistic industries. And we see it all across the space, whether it's telecommunications, what the FCC is doing, whether it's or not doing, right? Whether it's big pharma, big tech, right? It's everywhere. Big banks. It's monopolistic. And that is having an issue as well because that squeezes out opportunity and it undermines the power of the worker.
To follow up, similar to that, the Supreme Court ruling last week with Gorsuch, what as a congressman can you do in that kind of a situation?
Well, you can legislate law that rectifies that situation. You can. You know, there's opportunities that allow you as a congressman. This is why it's so important to be a legislator. When you're confronted with a decision like that, it doesn't preclude you, right, from writing laws that can mitigate the effect of that, right, or that can deter the outcome of that. And so enabling workers, strengthening provisions for mediation or strengthening arbitrary provisions or allowing workers to pursue direct course of action, these are the things that you can legislate creatively in light of what the decision was in the Supreme Court. So there's ways you can do that. That's why it's called, they're all equal branches here. No branch is more dominant than the other, right? It's imperative that all branches do their job. And right now Congress they're not doing their job.
You need control of both houses to do that?
Yes, you have to. And well, you shouldn't need to, okay, technically, right? Right now there's a rule called the Hastert rule, I believe, right? Hastert, where this rule blows my mind, where Republicans will not put a bill to the floor before they get complete know-how and knowledge that their entire party or the majority of their party will vote yes. So it's not even about bipartisanship, because even if that bill would pass in the House, for example, with a portion of Democrats and a portion of Republicans, and therefore have a majority of the House, they won't do that because there's some informal rules. We won't put a bill to the floor unless our whole party or majority of our party signs on. How undemocratic is that? Okay, so yes,
Just
unfortunately.
undemocratic enough.
So unfortunately, yeah, we do have to be in a position where we have complete control. Or we get folks in Congress, and I'm willing to do this. Like, don't confuse my conviction around being a progressive with an unwillingness to work with the other side. We've got to have solutions here. We've got to be willing to compromise. We've got to be able to figure out how we can move the ball in the direction that we all want it to go. And that means give and take. And I do think what we're seeing across the country in this moment are a lot of folks who decided to get involved in this space because we want solutions. We want to fix the problem. We don't just want to add to it. And so there is going to be a new energy, I believe, hopefully, in 2018, coming out of 2018. You'll get people who are now in this who aren't politicians, who came in at this to serve the public, who saw a real need and felt like it was time to step up and do something. And there will be hopefully a new ethos within DC, at least within the younger folks who are now in there, and that's on the left and right, to figure out, to do the work, to deal with complicated problems, and figure out how we solve them and better the country moving forward. Yes?
I was very interested in your, at the beginning you talked about education and how you feel about education and changing the way the schools work. I mean, at Taghkanic Hills, I've worked there as a substitute teacher for about 5 years. The school over here, half the kids that go to the elementary school have to get lunch from the school. The poverty level is such that they need free lunch for half the kids. Probably less than 30% of the kids are prepared to go on to college in that school. Also, we're dealing with an area that is very gun friendly, and so I just wanted to get a sense of what you're hearing as you go around and what because politics is local.
Yes, it is.
And we just were able to pass what we wanted and get our candidate in on the school board at Taghkanic Hills with only 55. Right, with only 55 or 57 votes. And so, we had to get out enough people so that we'd have that done. So could you tell me a little bit more how you feel about gun violence and what you're going to do, because we know how Faso is on that, and schools.
Yes. So on the school piece, the way New York supports schools is fundamentally flawed, and it creates the inequities that you're talking about. We fund our schools based on property taxes, and the tax base dictates of a community or of a zip code essentially dictates the wealth of a school and to what extent that school will have more than another school. So you could have situations where schools literally miles away from each other or less than a mile from each other look vastly different just because the tax base is different. And that's it. And we're talking about young people here. So young folks born into a neighborhood by no choice of their own, into a class by no choice of their own, are from day one immediately put at a disadvantage. Immediately. Because education, as I said earlier, is the way you are supposed to make up the difference. But if education only adds to the difference, well, you're essentially treating young folks like failing commodities. You're just letting them wither. And it's a problem. So, how do we fix that? Now, the challenge is, as a member of Congress, I can't dictate how the state funds its education. But what we can do is alleviate some of the burden on the state. And instead of propping up corporate welfare, or providing corporate welfare to big pharma, big oil, big banks to the tune of over $100 billion a year, take some of that money and actually provide it and put it into our Department of Education and allocate our resources in a way that enable states to not feel the pinch as much. Right now we spend $58 billion a year on our Department of Education. $58 billion compared to over $100 billion.
The whole country, you mean?
Yeah, compared to over $100 billion in corporate welfare. Corporate welfare. So we have the resources, and we can be smart about how we spend them. And then on top of that, you got this this tax scam, which only makes it more difficult because now people are paying more in property taxes than they shouldn't have to, double taxes because of this god-awful bill, and then the state has to figure out how to compensate for that, to pay for schooling and then make decisions what it should cut or not cut. So these things are all connected. And so yes, prioritizing education, figuring out how we as on the federal level can really provide the resources that are needed to the state and the local level is paramount. Now on guns, and I like that in the end you landed on gun violence. Republicans have been successful on this issue for some time because this whole issue has been framed around gun control. And when you start throwing the word gun control out there, then you already put on the defensive if you're a Democrat, and you have to explain, why do you want to control guns? What I want to do is fix the problem of gun violence. That's what I want to do. I want to deal with the epidemic that is taking 8 young kids' lives a day, that is putting 17 young kids in the hospital a day, that leads to women being killed 5 times more likely when they're involved in a domestic dispute. That's what I want to deal with. With all the mass shootings that are happening in our churches, in our movie theaters, in our concert halls, that's what I want to deal with. And I had a discussion with a Democrat who admitted to me over the course of the discussion he voted for Trump. And I said, well, why? Why? He said, because you want to take away my guns. And I said, well, what about the problem of gun violence? And I laid out for him what I just said. Kids, mass shootings. I said, let's just focus on that. Would you agree with me that there's a real problem here? Yes, I can't deny that. Great, so you agree we have to figure out how to solve it, right? You just don't ignore it. Yes, we should solve it. So can we just talk about how to solve it? And once he understood that my focus was just on trying to solve the problem, we then could circle back to some of the policies. And he was more open-minded about it, right? Because then he was thinking, okay, you're not trying to figure out how to make my right more infringed upon. You're thinking about how to help a problem that we both agree on is a real problem.
Well, that's good that
Right.
you separate violent and control.
Yeah,
I mean, that's a good comment.
And then you come back to what we all know are consensus things. Broad consensus for universal comprehensive background checks across party lines, 80%, 85%. Broad consensus on banning the bump stock, the thing that literally everybody learned about in Vegas and said, why is that legal? The bill never made its way to the floor, despite everybody saying it needs to be made illegal. Never got the CDC. Can we start funding it now to actually study gun violence? Wouldn't that be a novel idea? Most folks want to see that happen. And most folks don't like the fact that anybody can just walk into a store and buy a military weapon of war.
So you're going to debate this with Faso?
Absolutely. And here's what I'm going to focus on with him.
Okay.
I'm going to say, you're compromised. You're compromised because you're bought and paid for by the NRA. And everything I just explained to you, the reason why it can't get done is because it's been made so by the NRA.
How much contributions does he get from
Over
the
40,000. Not only that,
Non-trivial.
back to his record, since he's been in Congress, he voted for a gun concealed carry reciprocity bill. Which, just so you're clear what that means is,
lowest common denominator?
right, if you are another state And you can get a concealed carry permit. In some cases, you can do so having been convicted of stalking, having been convicted of domestic violence, domestic abuse. Now, obviously, in New York, you can't do that. But under this bill, you can get your permit in another state, walk across state lines, and now we're obligated, because our Congress saw fit to vote for this way, to respect the law, to respect that state's laws. What happened to state rights? Somehow they fell apart there. You know why he voted for that? He was told to. He was told to. So I always tell folks, complicated problem, but there really is an easy solution to this. One of them is, the big one is, draw a line in the sand. Any candidate, any person that takes money from the NRA is too compromised to be trusted on this issue. And this issue is too consequential to not draw that line. Yes.
More of a strategic question. I suspect a large number of those non-voters were youth, and that you mentioned, the number that you mentioned earlier. What strategies do you have to bring in more youth voters? And I'm asking this because, as part of the Copic Democrats, I swear everyone is over 16 that's involved, and I feel it's like, where are the kids?
They're living in Philmont right now.
No, I mean, I think a couple of things. One, you have to show up where they are.
Affordable housing.
So, we've been to a bunch of the community colleges, been to the young Dems and spoken with young folks, make sure they're aware of what we're doing. And, I also think making sure that young folks know my story. I think the benefit of my story and the fact that I did spend about a good 5 or so years doing something that was a real passion of mine in the music space is a nice way to, gain young people's attention. And it's interesting. Hip hop is actually the most popular culture and music right now in the world. So when kids hear that, young folks hear that, they perk up. It's what they're raised on, a lot of them now. So that's another way to engage. But also, and this matters, talking about the issues that affect them. You mentioned opioids, right? This is when I talk to young voters, they want to hear my views on drugs. Whether it's opioids, whether it's marijuana, what are we doing? How are we protecting our young people? How are we going to start decriminalizing this behavior? And make sure that actually give young folks the help that they need. College, debt, right? What are you going to do to help me get underneath this debt that I'm on? Or what are you going to help me do? I was just talking to a young man in Sullivan County at a diner there, the Monticello Diner. Came up to me afterwards and said, I started school, I changed my mind, I didn't know if I wanted to do it, I took on debt to do it, I left, now I still got the debt and I feel trapped. I feel like I can't take any more risks. I can't do anything else until I get rid of this debt hanging over my head. So it's talking about the reality of that, particularly in a climate where there's such job scarcity in the first place.
Well, I read this article that the young people are looking for several things. One is broadband, because they can't be in business without broadband. They can't be in school, so they need broadband. They need affordable housing. I mean,
Yes.
Columbia County is really bad when it comes to, affordable housing. I mean, where is it? Because young families, all the teachers at Taghkanic Hills all live up near Albany because there's no place for them to go with young children. And, there are no parks. There's, all the things that young people need. So we're losing them.
Yes.
They're just going away.
That's a good question. So why don't we just ask you, how do you combat gentrification in Columbia County? Let's just talk about us.
Well, a lot of times what happens is you get these grants, right? You'll get folks who, they get a state grant or a federal grant that'll come in, and the individuals or the participants who determine on the ground locally how that grant gets distributed, for what purpose, for what role, under what conditions, does not come from the people on the ground. Right? It is a inner circle of folks who aren't thinking necessarily always about the impact it's going to have on the community at large. So there has to be ways from the federal standpoint and on the state level hopefully as well, where you condition the funding, you condition the grants on behavior, right? So percentage of the development needs to be affordable for this purpose, or it needs to be geared towards playgrounds or community centers. You can do that work from the top down by what you tie the funding to. But when you just give folks a blank check and say do whatever you want with it, well then it doesn't reflect necessarily the needs of the public at that point. And we see this not just when it comes to the grants that we give for purposes of development. We see it in every other place. Our tax bills, another example of this. You know, I'm open to the fact that 35% for a corporate tax rate is high relative to the rest of the world. It's a high thing, no doubt, and it can disincentivize folks. But if we're going to try to deal with that reality, if at all, what we should be doing is making sure that in the event any breaks happen, they should be contingent upon you investing company in workers, increasing wages, investment in new jobs. You write that into the law. You make that a contingency. That's how you create the balance and get back to real solutions, not just write a blank check. So it applies in that world and also applies in the world of development.
So,
and
so
how the
corporations in declining industries don't get the tax cut.
Right, it could be any, or yes, but more importantly, if they get the cut, they do what they should do with it, which is not to say, oh, we're gonna then buy back our shares, jack up the price, and get everybody a bonus, but instead, we're gonna actually put it into our workers and increase wages. That's what we're gonna do. We're gonna create jobs. We're gonna invest, make new investment. That's what we're gonna do. You write that into the law, and you can. That's the job of a congressperson to do.
The gentleman here mentioned the term gentrification, and that is an issue, gentrification and progress within Columbia County. I want to see a high and beautiful tourist industry, but I also want to keep the rural nature and the industry and the culture going at the same time. It's what drove me here, and the bringing in more of the arts. It's a delicate balance, and I was just wondering if you've had any thoughts on that and how it's happening across the.
Well, a lot of this is state and local realities, right? And what the government can do is set the tone for what we prioritize, right? So you talk about rural. So what is the government doing right now to aid economic rural development? What are we doing at the federal level to aid that and allow small and mid-tier farming communities to flourish? You know what it's doing? Nothing. Zero. Instead, it votes for a farm bill that takes funding away from the farmers market program, which would help mid-tier and small-tier farmers. Takes money away from the organic cost-sharing program, which would help the burgeoning organic farming community. Takes money away from the food promotion program, which encourages grocery stores to buy local, which helps local farmers. It takes money away from all of those groups, right? And so it undermines, if you're thinking about how to keep the integrity of this place and leverage our natural strengths, one of them, no doubt, is our farming community and the ag, sustainable ag. Particularly when you look at the fact that we are less than, not less, but about 2.5 hours, 3 hours, depending on where you are in our district, away from New York City, where you have over $6 billion of unmet demand for local and organically grown food. So going back to infrastructure, you start building infrastructure, you fund our organic and local farming communities, and you actually have a vision for how this place can look and maintain its integrity. And guess what? Deal with the realities of food deserts that are plaguing our communities all throughout the district. The folks are shopping at Stewart's for groceries. Makes no sense. Meanwhile, we got a congressman who votes for a bill that increases the work requirements on SNAP because he thinks that the food choices aren't healthy enough. Well, how about you actually give choices in the first place? But on top of that, that's a lie. Folks who rely on SNAP have the same diets as anybody else and the same shopping habits. So it's a complete lie. But the reality is the vision matters. And having a congressman who doesn't just sit on the ag committee to say he sits on the ag committee, but one who sits there for the purpose of bringing home some support for the community and the ag community is critically important. And I think that's what I would try to focus on to maintain the integrity. That's one piece of it, to maintain the integrity and build a rural economic component all throughout this district. Yes?
What do you think of the militarization of the police?
Oh yeah. Well, it's not just the police. You know, it's
I read I'm on Facebook.
Yeah.
I'm on a site called Police the Police. I see these horrible videos, one after another every day, with the, they're beating people up, shooting people.
Yeah.
I'm just horrified by it.
Yeah, no, it's the militarization of law enforcement altogether, the militarization of how we now engage the world, right? We are become overtly militaristic. The fact that the folks who are meant to protect and serve the community are being armed essentially with weapons of war in communities, particularly communities of color and communities that have been marginalized and pushed to the side and essentially left to fend for themselves. The violence is exceedingly disproportionate and unjust. And when you arm people with weapons of the sort you're speaking of, it's literally throwing gasoline on the fire. So we've got to ramp that back incredibly. And we have to train our law enforcement and empower them with the tools that they need to deal with altercations and bring down the tension in the situation without immediately thinking the only way to do so is to reach for their firearm, right? There's ways to do this if we do the work and not. I actually think some of the training now suggests that it's the exact opposite, right? So it's how do we reframe the way we police and how we train our officers, because it's about them too. This is not about the anti-police thing at all. This is about making sure that they're best trained and they're best equipped for a very, very dangerous job, right? And so it's finding that right balance. Yeah.
I'll give you another picture on the other way of looking at it. The bad side is what you were just talking about. In Hudson, the police and the Hudson jails are trying to break that bad cycle, and they've set up a room in the jail with carpeting on it, Legos, and there's a whole group of people in Hudson, I'm part of it, who are taking kids of incarcerated parents into the jails, and the people who are incarcerated, by their good behavior, can create visitation time like once a month for an hour and a half with their kids, because there was studies that children who have incarcerated parents are more likely to get put in jail themselves.
Yeah, and that you don't need to study.
What I'm saying is,
you don't need to study for that.
The Hudson police, the Hudson police and the Hudson jails are cooperating with the people in Hudson. She knows all about it. To make this a user-friendly situation. Now I gotta ask you I gotta challenge you. How many 16-year-olds are in New York State prisons right now?
I don't know, but I tell you one thing: there's too many of them. Here's how I do know this. So I've done work with juvenile lifers. That's part of the work that I did as a lawyer. Juvenile lifers. Just think about that phrase. Juvenile lifers. Young folks who've been locked up since they were 15, 16 years old under now ruled unconstitutional sentences, unjust. But not until 2012 did the Supreme Court rule it this way. In Philadelphia alone, 300 African American men, at one time they were boys, were locked up under this law. 300 in Philadelphia alone. My client was a 15-year-old kid who was being raised by his grandparents. His parents were addicts. He was in a tough neighborhood. A drug dealer who was 25 came up to him and said, "Hey, go get that kid across the street. Tell him to come in the alleyway." What does he do? He's a 15-year-old kid being told by a 25-year-old drug dealer, "Go do something." He did what he was told. He had the kid come in the alleyway. He ran.
Now he's in jail for life.
Yes, you know what happened when he ran? The kid that he brought into the alleyway gets shot. So that kid dies. Another tragedy, right? So now you get the drug dealer. He gets sentenced to life. We lose a life. And that 15-year-old kid who was caught up in all of it gets thrown in jail for life too.
As an accomplice.
For life.
As an accomplice.
Yeah, as a felony murder. Felony murder. Simple.
Did you get him out?
Mandatory. Yes. So what happens is Miller v. Alabama happens in 2012, and it allows lawyers and groups like the Juvenile Law Center to step in and relitigate the sentence. So you can, sit down with the inmate, sit down with the individual, get their story, have evaluations done, talk about their good behavior over time. Tell the whole story here. Talk about the culpability or what level of culpability it actually was when they were 15 years old. Bring that all to bear in front of a judge and say either time served, Your Honor, or at least can we get time served plus 2, but let's rework this sentence. And yes, my client did get a new sentence, reduced significantly. So think about that though. He was in there for 20 years already. 20 years. 20 years locked up for being in the wrong place at the wrong time.
So you're in favor of justice,
Criminal
criminal
justice reform.
reform? Yeah.
Yes, absolutely.
Big time.
60% of folks right now in the state of New York are locked up, having been convicted of absolutely nothing. Innocent until proven guilty. That is what we're supposed to be founded on legally, right? That's our legal jurisdiction. That is one of the founding principles of our legal system. Innocent until proven guilty. How is it then that there are 60% of folks locked up in New York right now who have not been found guilty of anything? It's because we have a bail system that literally holds folks who've committed no violent crime. Maybe it's drug possession, maybe it's a sale of a drug, whatever the case might be, but they're being held, just held on the allegation, not proof of anything, just held there. And in some cases, they're held there for months, years. Khalifa Browder, young man was held for 4 years. 4 years. Beaten, tortured in Rikers Island, in Rikers. He finally gets his day in court. They dismissed the charges. And by the way, the allegation was he stole a backpack with a CD player. That was the allegation. Held 4 years in Rikers, a little kid. He gets released. Now, there's no happy ending to this. He took his own life. He took his own life. Now, this is our system.
That's why they call it the criminal justice system.
Yeah, because it's a problem.
The thing.
It is
There's
criminal.
16,000 16-year-olds in our adult prisons in New York State. That's nothing. I mean, that's bad, right? At the cost of $210,000 per kid. You could send him to his alma mater 6 times for that amount of money.
No, it's an industry, and it's a sick one.
Yeah.
And the fact that we are throwing young people away into prison, in essence to fund the prison, is deeply problematic. And we've got to move away from this. We've got to think of it this way: we got states legalizing marijuana, right? It's becoming a multi-million-dollar, billion-dollar industry as we speak. People are making a legitimate living off of this right
You
now.
got 2 here,
Right?
Massachusetts
Yeah.
and Vermont.
Right. Now we got young, disproportionately black and brown people who've been locked up in prisons for weed, for selling weed, for possessing weed. They're taken from their families, their communities, tearing families apart for generations. And now they get released and they're told you can't partake in the sale of this because of your record. So not only have you
And
taken,
you can't vote.
right, and you can't vote. So there's something very criminal about our criminal justice system.
Can I change the subject a second?
Yeah.
I'd like to. I mean, it's fascinating. It's amazing, and I love the way you speak about it. I'm interested in energy, in renewables,
Oh yes.
and I'd like to know what you want, what you're going to do. I drove to Vermont a few weeks ago. My granddaughter goes to University of Vermont, and everywhere you go, you see renewables there.
Yeah, no, this is a great topic, and this blends into a couple areas. One, dealing with the problem of climate change and the reality of carbon emissions and how we can deal with it. But at the same time, how do we create jobs, right? We can create jobs with investment in renewable. Right now, solar is growing at 17 times the rate of the overall economy. I was just at Hudson Solar not long ago, in my backyard in Rhinebeck. It's the first net zero energy commercial enterprise building in all of the Northeast, meaning it's 100% runs on renewable energy, a commercial building. So there are examples right here in our district of the kind of work that we can do, whether it's solar, whether it's geothermal, whether it's wind. So what's holding us back? Because we know there's actual jobs in that space and actually can help our environment, protect our environment. What's holding us back is big oil. We spend $4 billion a year propping up big oil. Before the tax break, so-called tax break, or I call it tax scam, Exxon, which was obligated under the law to pay 35%, was already paying 18% in this corporate tax rate because of all the tax breaks and tax subsidies that the government was giving it. So why don't we take those tax subsidies and those breaks and those credits and move them over into the renewable energy space and incentivize investment in wind, in geothermal, in solar. We can do this. It helps though.
Recycling.
Yes, all of the above. Food
But
waste.
it's a great opportunity for the young people to get jobs here
Yes,
and
yes.
be trained
And
for
be trained.
for new
and
jobs.
and be trained. You're exactly right. But guess who we have as our congressman? No, this matters.
Yeah.
Our congressman lobbied for pipelines. That's what he did. And you know what side of the argument he's on? That's what he does. Our congressman voted to repeal the stream protection rule, which, by the way, was a rule that requires companies to restore the stream as they found it. You do work, you set up shop next to a stream, and you start, dumping. Well, if you leave that area, then you have an obligation under the law to restore it. Well, John Faso saw fit to not really. He repealed it.
Trump's done a whole bunch of things.
That's a big deal because I mean we have some very big kills here that run through our entire county, and people use them and live next to them. It's right in back of our Taghkanic Hills School. It's all over the county.
No, he's not.
Speaking of Taghkanic Hills, we were there last night, and the high school kids were doing science projects, and a couple of the kids were doing
Testing the water.
Yeah, testing the water after, like Taghkanic Hills, the school emptied their swimming pool, and they tested what happened to the water.
Oh, interesting.
No, it's yeah. I mean, it's important that it's a great question, and I think that is the future. And the notion that we are not investing in our future, you invest in trends that are reflective of the future. We're not. We're just in this standstill, which is undermining our future and undermining opportunity for our young people.
Yeah.
Yes.
Something I don't know too much about, but I know that there is an issue of bringing oil by tankers up the Hudson River and distributing it to sources here within our counties. Do you know?
Yeah, the barges and making
Thank
sure the risk of spills and
Yes.
there's always a battle upon there's always a fight for more access, for more opportunities to expand that space and allow for docking of the sort, and it's problematic because all it does is encourage the continued investment in fossil fuel, and it continues to be how do we make room for this industry to flourish at the expense of real opportunities elsewhere and at the risk of polluting our water. Mm-hmm. Right? We see time and time again a spill what happened, a crack what happened, something what happened to a vessel, and then all of a sudden we're stuck now having to spend the money to clean it up and then hope we clean up enough to not suffer the consequences. So I think thinking about these issues, and the state has a role to play in this more so than the federal government, but how we prioritize this matters. And again, thinking about renewables as a priority can disincentivize and can encourage on the state and local level for our actors to step up and go, no. We need to be thinking about how to actually invest in renewable energy sources and not figure out ways to expand opportunities for oil rigs to dock themselves or make their way through the Hudson River at the expense of a potential risk of folks who live here.
Do you know Mr. Cuomo?
Do I know? Not personally.
What do you think of him?
I don't. I don't know him well enough to be honest to have a personal opinion about him. And honestly, in the current race between him and Nixon, I have no opinion at the point. I'm focusing a lot of my time on winning this seat, and that race is going to happen after the primary. So I'm really focused on this work.
It's just come up because one of the candidates that you're running against worked for him.
Yeah.
And some people consider that to be a positive, and some people consider that to be a negative. So I was curious, because it could come up.
He's not his father.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's that. I leave it up to him to decide how he wants to discuss his association. Thank you so
very
much.
much.
Appreciate it. My focus is really on what I can accomplish.
No trick. I had to throw in a trick question.
No, I respect the question.
No, I mean, I'm just passing on conversations because a lot of my friends are all taking different stance on different, different candidates. And obviously our entire goal is to beat Faso.
That's the goal.
And who's the person that will, get
You're looking
everyone's
at-
attention? I think so.
Thank you.
Tony, how are you going to nail him?
Nail him?
How do you strategize to nail him? I believe that you can perhaps debate him, all of that. But what do we deal with as he simply turns his head and says to my crowd, we don't want this change. We're on the powerful side. You've got the federal government. How do you argue that? I have no question about values and long-term goals. Let me ask you this: if you had 3 things to go into that Congress to work on,
Yeah.
practical things that you could do, not 5 years out.
Yeah.
What would you want to do?
So the 3, and this is very easy for me because I always have 3 things in my head. So one of them
Watch.
is about healthcare. To me, healthcare is the number one. I know it is the number one issue in this district for a number of reasons. One, hospitals are the biggest employer in this district. Number 1. Number 2, access to hospitals, particularly in the more rural parts of the district, are an issue. Number 3, the opioid epidemic requires attention and Medicaid funding. Planned Parenthood, another critical piece that a lot of folks in this district rely on. Elderly community relying on assistance, again coming from Medicaid. So the health and the cost of prescription drugs. These are all the different issues that this.
Well, these are things you would work
But
on.
here's how I'm going to answer both your questions. You said, how am I going to nail him?
Yeah.
And what I want to focus
How do you
on.
do that?
He's so bad on this issue. He's bad on the most salient issue.
Faso,
Faso is. He is so bad on this that one, I can not only talk about what I want to accomplish, which I'll get to in 1 second, but I can also focus on what he's done, right, to his constituents, to not just Democrats, but Republicans and independents. He promised this community he would not vote for a bill that defunds Planned Parenthood. He promised the community. He promised the community that he would protect folks, looked Andrea Mitchell in the eye and said, I will not take away your health care and make sure that your pre-existing conditions are protected. He then voted for a bill that does exactly the opposite, right? Voted for the first version of the bill before it even went to the floor. So he voted for the worst version of the bill, not even having to do so, because he was told to do so by outside interests. Bad, bad, bad. Now, that's just the bad. How about the good? What do I want to fight for? What do I want to restore? What do I think can help the community at large? As I said, how about we fight for universal health care? Now, what is that?
You can't do that by yourself. I mean,
No,
easily.
you
can
no one
fight
could do
for
that.
it.
No one could do that by themselves.
You can fight for it. You can fight for all of these.
There's nothing that any one individual in Congress can do by themselves.
Right. But I'm concerned with Faso. You're upseating this guy. Healthcare, he turns his head and says, I'm for the Second Amendment. Taxes for the ridiculous taxes for the wealthy.
If he says to the healthcare question, I'm for the Second Amendment, I'm going to say, did you hear anything I just said?
No.
Did you? There's a reason, not you, I'm talking about Faso.
No.
There's a reason why you don't show up to town halls, clearly, because you haven't been listening. If you would go to a town hall and you would listen to your constituents, the answer to that question wouldn't be Second Amendment. The answer to that would be, how are you going to fix the fact that people cannot afford their health care bills, that they're worried that if they get hit with a bill, they're going to go into debt, that their children potentially lose their health
But
care.
Republicans have an answer. They have the answer. They've had the answer for 15 years.
What is that? I'm curious.
There is no answer. They have no answer.
I
They've
thought
done
there was an
nothing.
answer.
When they've had the power for it, when they were in the minority, when they were the majority, Under this president, they do absolutely nothing.
But I wanna be-
turn their heads and say, divert your attention from all of that because there's a Second Amendment.
I want to be very clear about
You know,
something.
they
though.
do that. You know, it's unreal.
But I want to be clear about something because and I get this kind of question quite a bit. It is important to win this seat and to unseat John Faso. But an important element to that is getting folks who voted for Faso and now are disillusioned or voted for Trump. That's a piece. It's a piece. But make no mistake about it. If we want to win this seat,
You need the voters.
you need folks who've been on the sidelines, not the folks who can be wooed by that tried and true rhetoric that you're talking about, but the folks who have been checked out and who said, I'm done with all this nonsense. It doesn't matter to me anymore. Who cares? I'm throwing up my hands. If there's ever a gift, and there's only one gift that I can think of that Trump gave us, is that he has cleared the field in this sense and made folks reevaluate that perspective. And now they're at least primed a little bit to think to themselves, well, maybe this is something's wrong here. And they start looking. They're looking for something that feels different, something more authentic, something more genuine, something that actually reflects their values or someone. And this is the moment to seize on that. This is the moment to go get those voters because now they're clued in. And we cannot waste this opportunity by worrying too much about how we preach to a choir that really doesn't belong to the same church in the first place. But focusing on the choir folks who took off their robes and walked out of the church a long time ago. And we got to figure out how to get them back.
So what's going to be your message, though, in your commercial? What's your line?
If you've seen the commercials, the message is clear. Everybody seen the commercials? All right. Not yet? The message is clear. We're here to listen. I'm going door to door, talking to voters, engaging, being accountable, not being, a politician talking from afar, but literally showing up, going to you. Here I am. What are the issues? What do you care about? And together, we can do this. Together.
Can you be a little more specific in your message?
Oh, yes.
I loved when you came in and you immediately you talked about education. You immediately, we all hear so many general things. I'm going to do this and I'm going to talk to you, but because this is a small part of America, the more specific you can, if you can tell what people have been telling you.
Make no mistake about it. I was just describing for you the general flavor, right?
Okay.
Within that general flavor, right, I talk about healthcare and universal affordable healthcare. I talk about dealing with the tax bill and how the rich seem to be just getting rich on the backs of working middle class families. I talk about making sure we actually have common sense gun legislation. I talk about education. I talk about the things, but within what I think is an important energy. Right? Because I don't think it's important. I think you don't just want to talk at people. I think people are tired of just being talked at.
Exactly. That's what I'm saying. If there's some way you could be as local as possible.
I think going to someone's door.
No, but I mean in your commercials.
As close as it gets, right?
Right. Yeah. In your commercials, because it's so when you speak about these local issues. Now I know who you are. I didn't know who you were until I heard you speak those local issues. So anything that, like he even mentioned about Lyme disease. That's a big deal here.
Oh, major
it's
deal.
A major, huge deal.
Got new types of ticks and
right.
Ticks and
so Faso. That was the one thing I heard in the last year that actually got my attention because he did that. So I'm saying it's retail politics here
on
too.
that same line, could you? I've been doing the door knocking. Could you introduce your staff and talk a little bit about what you, your staff, and we can do in these next 27 days to get you as the main Democratic candidate?
Well, I got a pretty good staff here. Stand up, staff. Introduce yourselves. Tell them who you are, what your roles are. I'll let you speak for yourselves.
This is the girl you really want to hear from.
Yes, absolutely. Lizzie is our field organizer extraordinaire.
Hi everyone, my name's Lizzie. I'm the Columbia County organizer. I probably have called all of you like 10 times. Yeah, I live in Hudson, and if any of you want to help us knock on doors or make calls, it's the best way to talk to voters, get the word out, get people engaged. There's so much energy, and we're really closing in on the day. So, you know.
Absolutely. And Lizzie is one of, at this point, what, five or six field organizers, you know, in different parts of the district, doing the same work she's doing. You know, on the ground, canvassing, getting folks to phone bank. You know, we're everywhere now, all across the district. Go ahead, man.
I'm Lucas. I've been working with Lizzie here in Columbia, in Greene and Montgomery too, a little bit. Just making calls, knocking on doors. You know, trying to do the same thing Antonio's talking about. Just trying to listen. You know.
And Lucas just started, right? 2 weeks now?
Yeah, 2 weeks.
2 weeks now. Yeah.
We've met in person. Can you call us again?
And I'm Brendan. I'm Antonio's communications director, so I deal with a lot of like media contact, but I'm also deal with the stuff that what you're talking about like our message and our stances on issues. And you know, what I would say is what we're really trying to do is we're working hard. We're showing up everywhere in this district, and we're here to listen to you. That's what brought us here tonight. And that also means if you have any questions about how we feel about a certain issue, or what our stance is on something, or what we're doing about something, please feel free to reach out. You can reach out to Lizzie, who will then loop me in, and I'd love to have a conversation with you. And if you go to our website, we have our whole platform listed there. But if you have any more specific questions, please, we're always here to listen. So.
Will you be in Hudson Pride?
Yes, we will. I believe we will. Yes, it's on the calendar. Yes, we'll be there.
And just to complete the picture, because this is an operation. It's a $2 million operation. This is not. It's something that we built for over a year now. I'm very proud of what we've been able to pull together here. We have a campaign manager who's done races before. Who's back in Kingston. That's where our office is right now in Ulster County. We have a field director. This is a field organizer. We have a field director, though, the person who manages the field across the district. Now, this field director, Christian, was a critical piece in Dutchess County's success. He managed all the races in Dutchess County and was one of the most, if not the most sought after field director within the congressional field. And we got him to come to our team. So we have a great field director as well. So it's campaign manager, field director. Of course, you have your finance director, someone who helps facilitate the fundraising. And as you know, at this point, that matters. So it's an operation that we are now running day in and day out. And now with over a year under the belt, I think it's humming. I think we got a nice movement going organizationally, and our reach is long. And we're out there, and we have hundreds of volunteers at this point as well, which is very exciting.
I have a suggestion. When you talked about universal health before, and you're talking about bringing new people into your campaign, and earlier she talked about the younger people, and he mentioned the younger people. One of the things, we have two 20-year-olds, one college graduate, one not, working multiple jobs because people won't hire them full time because then they have to pay health care. They work, that kind of system, and their friends are in the same kind of system, where they're working in the communities, in service industries, in retail, in online jobs, supposedly, tech jobs which are supposed to be lucrative. And they're in a situation where they don't have health care, or they have Fidelis care through the fact that they don't make enough to pay for themselves.
Yeah.
Or they had a full-time position, and the company, when universal care came to the forefront, started cutting and turning everything into part-time jobs. so that they wouldn't have to deal with, you know, Obamacare and the mandates type of thing.
Yeah.
And numbers. And I think that's an area that, you know, I think why a lot of young people got swept up by Bernie in the last presidential, even though he's an independent and not a Democrat. That's another story. But you know that was one of the things. The tuition, the debt that they encounter with the schooling and the health care, and the fact that they can't get a job that's not going to pay them, you know, anywhere between $10 and $15 an hour more than that. You know.
No, I've heard this story time and time again, particularly from young people. I've heard a story from a young woman who talked about how her friend won't go to work because it's better economically for them to stay home and not risk having to pay more and essentially, you know, not have the ability to pay more, just end up being broke by virtue of having to have work just enough to pay healthcare and end up being broke, as opposed to just not going to work at all and, you know, getting benefits elsewhere, right, by virtue of not being employed. That is a horrible situation to find oneself in, and it does not enable anybody. It creates behavior that is not empowering, and I think it's a travesty that young folks find themselves in this position time and time again. So, you know, and this conversation comes up quite a bit in terms of how we can deal with this in a meaningful way. So you look at, you know, the different ways we can get to universal health care. And there are different ways. You know, Bernie Sanders talks about a single payer system essentially overnight, right? Which I have to say, I don't know how that's actually practically a thing you can do overnight. I think there are things we can do, though, immediately. Immediately, we can achieve pretty quickly and have a profound effect on our healthcare system. If we give everybody the choice, young, healthy folks as well, the choice to opt into Medicare and take a high-risk pool and allow folks to opt into it and drive down premiums, drive down deductibles, drive down the administrative costs, it'll have a profound effect on the cost of care all around. Because now you have a public competitor in what used to be a totally private-based system. And in that purely private-based system, the private companies can dictate all they want, how they want to charge, and they can even collude without proper regulation to do that. You introduce a public competitor, and now they all have to be kept honest. And more people will opt in to that public competitor. And organically, what you start seeing is a single-payer system start to take shape, right? And then the folks who like their health care, who are on employer-based insurance, who are not ready yet to just be told to give it up, can watch and see what happens, see how the market moves, see how folks opt in. And we can redefine what it means to have affordable health care. I think right now it's like 9% of your income is deemed affordable. That's not affordable. If you're paying almost 10% of your income into health care, that's not affordable. It should be, I'd say, cut that in half, right? So we can think about the ways in which we define health care, what's affordable, what's not affordable for families, and increase subsidies around there too. But you're right. I mean, we've got to get to a system where there's no profit in it. We've got to get there. We've got to move in that direction. We've got to make sure we treat healthcare as a human right.
Have you met the Obamas?
I have not. I have folks who work on my team. Actually, not even work on my team. Folks who I consider dear friends of mine, who I went to law school with, who did actually work in the Obama administration. Mm-hmm. In fact, one of my best friends from Oxford was John Kerry's chief of staff. He was Secretary of State. So, you know, it helps because, you know, these are folks who worked on campaigns. But yes, I have not met him directly.
Oh, no, he wasn't. Michelle. Everybody wants to know Michelle.
Or Michelle. I haven't met Michelle. I haven't met Michelle. Mrs. Obama.
Be nice to have
either.
Be nice to have your picture taken with.
Well, yes, it would be. Yes, it would be. No question. Well, this has been great. Well, thank you. I want to thank all of you for coming. This has been a very lively discussion. I hope you got a sense of who I am and what I care about and my issues. June 26th, it's coming. It's right around the corner. And I know there are some good candidates in the field, and I have not said, nor will I ever say anything negative about the other candidates. I just will say a lot of good things about me. And
And they seem to be
you know,
true.
Thank you, sir. I would love to have your support. We are building something here that I think can win, can ultimately win, and that's the objective here, is to win. The stakes are too high to hope and wish. You have an opportunity to, I think, work with a campaign that can get the job done. And I humbly ask for you to sign on and do the work and talk to Lizzie. And, you know, either way, though, thank you for your time. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. You're going to be in the debate next week in Hudson, right?
Yes.